On this week's edition of the Power and Motor Yacht podcast, we speak with the unfortunate captain whose boat was sunk by a whale.
This episode is brought to you by Volvo Penta. With over a century of pushing boundaries in the marine industry, Volvo Penta delivers reliable and sustainable solutions for boaters and marine professionals worldwide. From their industry-leading IPS system offering superior maneuverability and fuel efficiency to their innovative D4 and D6 marine engines, Volvo Penta has you covered. Experience enhanced features like joystick driving for precise control and the fully integrated glass cockpit display for a seamless navigation experience. Whether you're navigating calm waters or challenging the high seas, trust Volvo Penta to provide the performance and reliability you expect. Visit VolvoPenta.com to learn more about their revolutionary products and services. Hey guys, this is Chris Dixon, Senior Editor with Power and Motoryacht Magazine, bringing you the Power and Motoryacht podcast. And I'm speaking today with Ryland Kenney. Ryland was the unfortunate participant in a video that has made him at least internet temporary famous for getting taken out by a whale off of the northeastern coast. So without further ado, Ryland Kenney, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, man? And I want to thank you for taking the time on short notice to have a chat with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to take the call and give you some insight to what went on with the event, because there's a lot of speculation, and I think we all know that the media kind of portrays things a certain way that could be more or less not accurate, I guess.
A little sensational maybe as well.
Yeah, but I think the articles, if folks have read like the New York Times and Washington Post, and I think Chicago, I forget the name of something like that. But I think those articles are really factual, which was good for the most part. But yeah, a lot of the interviews, that was the main reason why I wanted to do as many interviews as I did. If folks have kind of watched like the local news here, maybe in the New England area, or even national and then international, because I've done some in UK and Canada and Australia as well. But just to kind of get the facts out, kind of what happened. But
so
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just going to say, tell us real quickly about what you do for a living and a little bit about your boating history as well. Before we dive in, so to speak. I think people want to know a little bit more about who Ryland and your crewmate were too.
Yeah, so actually, Greg and I both work in the life sciences field. He works in sales, so he works sales for another organization. Actually, we met about 10 years ago, and we worked together. Actually, I was his manager at the time. And we actually just bonded on from fishing. We talked about fishing a lot. He was big into fly fishing. Like he actually lived in Alaska for several years. So even more experienced than me. I've been fishing since I was 5, but mainly kind of around this area. Although I've done a lot of trips to the Caribbean and down south, like in Florida and other areas around the world and fished. But I live in New Hampshire and Greg lives in Mass.
Okay.
So I currently work as a program manager at a life sciences company currently. And so I've been in the field in that industry for the past almost 20 years or so.
And obviously a dedicated fisherman. So and tell us about your boat, the boat that you guys were on as well, and then let's get into the event and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so the boat we were using it was Greg's father-in-law's boat. So he lets him use it basically anytime he wants. His father-in-law is not as kind of sturdy on his feet. He's quite a bit older. I think he's about 80 or so. So he doesn't get out as much. So Greg will take out his boat a lot, and we'll kind of switch. Like sometimes I'll go because I have a boat actually close by too. So sometimes I'll take my boat out. He'll take his or that boat out.
Yeah.
So that morning, the fishing before that, the last 3 days was just incredible. Probably the best I've seen it in a long, long time. Maybe ever. I mean,
wow.
We were catching. Yeah. Like the past 3 days, I was getting out, like, I was just like, the heck with work. I'm going out fishing. Like I'm taking days off, whatever I need to do to get it back on the water. Cause every like 3 days leading up to that, I went out and actually there's loads of bait, and the whale was around at that time, and it was getting close to boats during that time
the same
too.
whale?
Oh yeah, it was definitely the same whale, and it was kind of around, basically doing the same thing we are fishing. We were trying to catch the Manhattan or pogies.
Yeah,
that were in the area. It's just big schools of them. So the whale was feeding on those, and we were, but there was underneath the bait, or even on the edge of the bait, is kind of where we are, because we wouldn't want to be on the center of the biomass, because that's the riskiest spot to be.
Sure.
In terms of whale breaching and stuff. So actually, we try to stay on the edge, and then when if the whale surfaces any spot near us, we actually move away from the whale and try to go like kind of on the opposite side.
Yeah.
But for this, we were catching like 40-inch plus striped bass, which is, I mean, you may catch like a couple of those a season, but every trip I went out, I was catching 5 or 6.
Oh my gosh.
In that range. Yeah, it was just unbelievable. It's just like a feeding frenzy of just big bass. So the night before, I told him about, because I fished with another buddy on my boat because he couldn't get out of work the day before, and I told him that I caught 14, 15 fish. Half of them were 40-inch plus, the other half were 35 plus. So he said, "Hey, why don't we go on my father-in-law's boat? Meet me at the dock at 5 a.m."
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of hesitant, because I've been, I was like, I don't know if I want to get up that early and stuff. At first, the night before, so I'm like, I don't know. Like, I've just had a really good fishing days. It looked like it was going to rain too on the forecast, so it was like 60% chance of rain. So I'm like, I don't want to get out there and get wet. But then I was thinking to myself, I'm like, the fishing has been so hot. I'll just wear my rain gear and just suck it up, and get a few hours of sleep, and then rest afterwards. So I meet him at the dock, and this is where the story gets a little bit interesting. Just kind of like foreshadowing. So we get there, and he says, Ryland, I don't know if we're going to go out, because my bow navigation lights aren't working, and it's pretty bad out. So he kind of is like, we're going to have to wait for a little more light. So we were trying to kind of troubleshoot that, and the bulb was just burnt out. We didn't have a backup one, but there was enough light. We had the overhead light on the boat.
Sure.
So at least we had that. So we ended up going out, and as we're going out,
from, Ryland?
We left from Elliott, Maine.
Okay.
Yep. So we left from Elliott, Maine, and we're going up through the Piscataqua River that runs through Portsmouth, and then goes out to, kind of close to Rye, Newcastle. And then if you go north, it's close to like York and Kittery, and those areas is kind of where that mouth is. So as we were going out, we got to the Portsmouth Harbor, which is kind of like the inlet of the river that meets the Atlantic Ocean, basically. The fog started becoming really dense. Like it was maybe 10, 15 feet of visibility in front of us. Like, it was really thick. So, yeah. So that was another thing. So we were kind of both saying, actually, Greg was captaining. So we kind of do that when I'm captaining my boat. I let him call the shots and vice versa, So he was saying, he's like, Ryland, I don't know if we'll be able to get out too much further. So I was like, well, how about we just putz around in the harbor area and just see if we can see any bait? And we didn't, but eventually the fog started to kind of clear, and he was using his navigation to figure out kind of where he was. Cause we've fished in that water system for, I don't know, almost a couple decades. So we're pretty familiar with it. So as we're going out, the fog starts to clear along the coastline, and we see some boats around, and then we kind of go a little bit more offshore, maybe a mile off the shore of like Rye, New Hampshire. And then we see probably like 5 or 6 boats about a couple miles offshore. So we met up with them, and we noticed like the big school of pogies are back. So we're noticing the pogies. And at that point, there was no whale sightings yet. So we're fishing along. We're catching some big fish, catching bait. We started catching fish, getting in a groove, and then after that, we did see the whale surface a couple times around us. So we're again just kind of keeping our distance and trying to avoid the biomass of the bait. And then the pogie school started to break up a little bit and went further, and I think further east, I guess is the way to say it. So we went a little bit further away from the coastline, maybe another half a mile to a mile out, and it was more boats, so probably about a dozen boats in that area, and we were fishing along. And again, we were just still sticking to our same plan, is like, if we see the whale, drive away from it, stay on the edge of the bait schools, don't get too close, etc. And that's what every other boat was doing. Actually, I will say that all of the boats that were on the water were pretty responsible. They were all just like kind of they're all around the edges. Nobody was in the center. So I could tell that people knew, well, at least they knew what to do to try to keep themselves at minimal risk.
Sure.
Whereas the day before, I got a funny story too, is there was flat bottom boats just driving right in the middle of the biomass, just like, oh, I'm going to get in here and just fish this because I want to catch it. And I actually saw this probably young teenage kid, might be like, maybe early college, but he basically swims out in his paddleboard and he goes right in the middle of the biomass. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, that whale opens up his mouth, he's swallowed, maybe spit back out. But it was unbelievable. Like some people just, so that's the thing. A lot of the media is kind of saying, oh, they were too close. They deserve it. And it's just like, you don't know the story and what we did. It's, that's all speculation. That,
right.
Obviously those things kind of rub me a little bit the wrong way, but I just got to kind of suck it up. But, as we were fishing, again, all the boats were kind of fitting in, like every boat was giving each other space, and we were around that, basically a circle. We were kind of around the outer edge of that bait. 100 feet back, we saw the whale break. So it was quite a ways away from us. And actually, I was hooked up onto a fish at that point. It seemed, a pretty decent fish. If you see the video, you can see, like, if you kind of slow down the video and zoom it in or whatever, you can see me with a rod in my hand, left side of the boat in the middle by the helm. Yep. And then Greg's on the right, and he has a net, and he's actually getting ready to net my fish. I'm getting it kind of close to the surface. And then, I hear like a real loud kind of swirling towards the back of the engine. I look back, and I knew it was happening. I'm like, oh no.
Oh my God.
Kind of thing. And then I heard a big whoosh, and I saw the mouth of the whale completely open out of the water. And I'm just kind of looking at it like, and this was all probably like a second or two, right? And it comes up, and then like as the mouth closes, it just kind of comes down and basically crunches the engine. I heard a big like, crunch sound on the engine.
Yeah, it looked like it hit the rear, I guess, port quarter. Yeah, he kind of landed on the engine and then on part of the very rear corner of the boat as well, or was it just the engine?
Yeah, it was mostly centered right on the engine. Okay. But yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit. Yeah, it slipped. But it did slip off the back, the transom port side. So yeah, the left side. Right. That's where the whale kind of slipped off. But I can get to that. But yeah, so crunched the engine, and I was about, again, when the mouth closed, I was just kind of looking at it, being like, it was almost like, is this really happening? I was a little bit in disbelief.
I don't doubt it.
Yeah. But I didn't have really time to sit there and just be like, what the heck is happening? I had to I kind of went into like survival mode, is like, how do I get myself out of this situation? And I was holding on my rod, and I'm just like, all right, the heck, I got to give this fish up, right? Like, and save myself. So I kind of threw the rod out. And then, like, as you mentioned, the whale, I could hear him start slipping, like he was dragging on top of the engine and slipping back into the ocean. And it felt like slow motion, but it was probably pretty quick. But when he slipped back, he slipped off the left side. And when that happened, already there was a ton of water in the back of the boat, and the bow started kind of rising. But as he slipped off and to the left, that's when the boat started to basically tip to the left.
Yeah.
And I knew it was capsizing at that point. So as water was collecting and I felt the boat, feeling like it was going to flip over, I basically stepped up a little bit on the side of the boat and actually jumped as far as I could anyways, like horizontally away from the boat. And that's when you can see me dive in, and then I'm actually underwater when the boat hits, and I come up probably 2 feet away from the wreckage.
Wow.
So
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha.
I was just going to add one more point, and I was going to say, like, a lot of, the media and like a lot of the stuff that's coming out is like, oh, the whale hit the boat and they got flung from the boat like 20 feet in the air and blah blah. I'm like, no, I jumped away from it. The whale didn't fling me up, or so.
No, it looked to me like you jumped, like, and
Yeah.
the presence of mind to get clear of it as well. I'm sure there's and a lot of times, I guess, did it seem, or in heavy situations like that, a lot of people say time kind of slows down. Did it have that feeling? I mean, like, okay, were you thinking, okay, I need to jump off of this boat, I need to get clear enough of it that it's not going to land on me if it capsizes, or was it just all kind of a blur? You know what I mean?
No, it was definitely slow motion for sure. Like, it all happened in about 5 seconds, but it definitely felt a lot longer. Like, I can still think back on it and be like, even when the whale breached out of the ocean, the mouth was open. When it hit the engine, is almost like when time stopped a little bit. Honestly, I was like, oh wow. And then that was kind of like a pause, and then it started slipping off the back of the boat, and that's when I was just like, okay, how am I going to get myself out of this situation?
Yeah.
So it was almost like I had time for like second, maybe 1.5 seconds worth of shock, and then it was, fight or flight, basically.
Right. Did it almost look like there was a moment at which the boat might have righted itself, but I guess there was just, like you said, too much water and just too much weight on the stern. It looked like there was a brief moment where it might not have actually capsized, but it did, right?
Yeah, I think when I started seeing water, like a lot of water pouring in the back, like initially when the whale hit it, and then when it slipped off, I'm like, okay, if it slips off the stern, we've got the bilge and stuff like that, we may be able to kind of recover from this. But then when it slipped off to the left and I felt the boat, listing really heavy to the left, I knew that it was probably not gonna, we aren't going to be able to recover. That's why.
What model was the boat? It was a 23 footer, right?
No, it wasn't a 20. I know there's a lot of people saying it was a 23, but it actually wasn't. It was a 21.
21.
Yeah, 21-foot Parker center console. I can't remember the model number, but
okay. And the weather obviously was foggy. I imagine it was fairly cool. How about the water temperature? And yeah, just talk us through what happened after that. And did it feel like the whale? I'm wondering if you thought about it at that time. The whale was just doing its thing. The whale wasn't like targeting you guys, but were you worried that there was going to be some further impact between your body and the whale, or that the whale was actually pissed off? Or did you have a pretty clear sense that, okay, he came up, he got his food, I'm sure he was shocked as you guys were when he hit the boat? I'm just wondering what your thought process was on that.
Yeah, my thought process definitely wasn't any concern about the whale. I kind of felt like because when he slipped off very like methodically and kind of slowly. I knew like, okay, what he's doing now is he's basically going to slide off and dive.
Yep.
His kind of deal. So I wasn't concerned about the whale, because there's been some speculation, weren't you worried when you get in the water that the whale is going to come back and get you? I'm like, no. I'm probably the last thing on its food source, and they can't even swallow objects more than a foot, I think, long anyways. So I wasn't concerned about that. But for me, it was just getting away from the boat.
Yeah.
Was the biggest thing, before because it hit. And then as I hit the water, that was the biggest. So I consider myself a pretty strong swimmer in general, but when I hit that water, it was 55 degrees. And so I had like the temperature shock. That was the main thing that made me kind of like panic a little bit, because it was just like, I was having trouble catching my breath. I was like, just kind of like, okay, I got to try to calm myself down. And then I didn't see Greg at the time either. When I was in the water and I surfaced, I'm like, oh no, where is he? Do I need to go back and try to see if he's under the boat? Like, what should I do? Like, all those things are kind of going through my head. And then as I'm trying to make that decision, like, he pops up. It felt like a long time, but it was probably like 5 seconds, honestly.
Yeah.
And then I saw him pop up, and then we swam to each other, and he was a lot more calm than me, and he kind of, which was nice because he kind of calmed me down a little bit because I was just kind of breathing, and he's like, "Hey, are you okay, buddy?" He's like, "We're good. Let's get out of here now," kind of deal.
Yeah.
He was joking. He's joking around. He's like, "Well, I'm built more like a sea lion because he's got a little more he's got a little more buffer, I guess." So
right.
you know what I mean? So the water temperature didn't really bother him that much. So he basically just kind of like, I hung because I didn't have a life vest at the time. My vest was actually on my boat, and I was just like contemplating getting it before I went.
Oh, wow.
Went with him. And there was vests and stuff on board, but I usually like to have like that, the one that inflates automatically.
Yep.
On me. But there's vests and rings and stuff on board, but there's no way for me to grab any of that stuff, at the time.
Wow.
But I question too, is like, I've had a couple interviews like with safety people and et cetera. And I asked myself, I'm like, the way I jumped off the boat, it was actually, I don't know if it was it's always tough. I always play the what ifs in my mind. Like, what if I had a life vest? Well, if I had a life vest, if I jumped off right when I hit the water, it would have deployed, and that would have stopped my momentum from going down the ocean and away from the wreckage. Right.
Wow. Yeah. Sure.
So if I had that on, would it have made me more buoyant and made me more, potentially like the wreckage could have hit me? I don't know, but you play all these different scenarios in your head, but either way, like that's one of the takeaways for me is like never going out without the life vest. Like if I don't have my life vest on, I'm not going out.
Yeah.
Because you never know what's going to happen. I mean,
never do.
Yeah,
that's for sure. I mean, especially, you're the poster child for that now, for better or for worse,
Yeah.
Well, what happened immediately with the boat? Did it capsize, hull up, and then just take us quickly through that, and then the pickup from the two teenagers.
Yeah. So as Greg and I met, we called over. We saw the teenagers not even that far away from us, and we kind of raised our hands out, and they came right over. And they grabbed us. At this point, I wasn't really looking back. I was just looking on how do I get out of the water. So I didn't actually look back on the boat because I was trying to swim away from it. And then the teenagers, picked us up. We were in the water for maybe a couple minutes, so not that long, which was good.
Was it, and the conditions were calm enough that it wasn't too difficult to get aboard their boat?
It was a little rough out there, but again, Greg and I are just really pretty seasoned to be on the water and stuff like that. So it was all about timing on how to get like onto the swim ladder, and they helped Greg up, and I think Greg grabbed my hand and helped me up the boat. So that was actually pretty seamless, like getting onto their boat. I mean, it was a little rough, and they had like I think it was like more of like a flat bottom, almost like whaler type of boat, smaller, maybe, I don't know, 16, 17 feet or something like that. So we got aboard, and we're, just kind of like, catching our breath. And Greg was kind of like, did you guys get a video of that by chance? And they were like, actually we did. So we were kind of talking through that. And like, he was like, oh, that's great. Cause we could tell the story, but nobody would really believe it maybe, So,
yeah.
So the video was critical, that Colin actually, Yeager, he took the video. So that was critical of him taking that. But he picked us up, and I think we were all I think Greg was probably the most person that was just like vocal and a little more calm about the situation. Like me, I was just kind of like just trying to process everything at that point.
Sure.
And I think the kids were too, as they were just like, what do we do? They were almost like, all right, we got him. What do we do now? Because they weren't driving or anything, and Greg was just kind of talking to him. So I think that kind of talks about Greg's, I mean, he's 40 years of experience, on the water, and he's kind of running a lot of situations. So I think that's kind of like, that's where that comes through. Right. So, but as we're sitting there, just trying to like figure out, do we have our phones? Who do we need to call, etc. We actually start, their boat actually starts getting closer to the capsized boat. So that's where we saw the Parker, and it was totally upside down at this point. We actually saw the engine the lower end unit sticking out of the water, and then also the hull
Yeah.
of the boat. You can see the black bottom. So we're kind of hanging a little bit by the boat, and like the kids were like, "Well, what should we do? What do you want us to do?" We're at this point, we're just like, "Well," Greg and I were like, "Well, there's nothing we can do about the boat. We need to just get out of here."
Yeah.
At that point,
And hypothermia being a bit of a concern, I'm sure, at least. Yeah. Like how
yeah, a little bit.
Your temperature.
Yeah. Once I got out of the water, though, actually, I was a little bit cold. And the great thing about it is there must have been like 3 or 4 boats as we were driving by that said, "Hey, do you guys need some dry clothes? Do you need this, do that?" So,
yeah.
I mean, that's the best thing. And another good takeaway for me, and something I always preach is like, as in the boating world, whatever is you're doing, if somebody's in need, you drop it.
Yep.
And help them. Right.
It's a really good lesson.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think I definitely felt the camaraderie, by the other boats for sure.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Like, I think, and Colin and Wyatt, you've even said that, but they said, if we didn't pick them up, there was 5 boats in line right in back of us to do it. So, that's like kind of the camaraderie about it.
The obvious. So, were you able to get Cito to come out and power buckle the boat and ride it, or did it ultimately sink, or do we know?
No. So actually, they had Cito, and Cito didn't have the equipment to basically return the boat out and pump it out.
Yeah.
And tow it. So they had to contact the US tow or something like that, or US boats, something like that.
US maybe.
Boat US, maybe. Yeah, maybe that was it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they came out and they actually tipped the boat over and pumped it out and brought it back to the marina.
Wow.
So we got it back and it was all dried out. We took a look at it, and at first looks, actually, surprisingly, the transom looked totally fine, like structurally.
Because it's pretty tough.
Yeah, definitely tough boat. So I was thinking, the bolts that were bolted into the transom, the engine bolts, I was like, there's got to be some cracking, spider cracking, or I was expecting it to be basically almost hanging on a little bit, maybe one of the bolts coming off or something. But no, the bolts looked like they had there's no stress cracking, nothing.
That's amazing.
On the mounting. I know, it was kind of crazy. The only thing that was, the biggest loss was, the engine was just kind of flattened, it was crushed. And actually the top cowling of the engine, where it cracked, you can actually see, as we were looking at the engine, there was actually whale skin and blubber embedded in the crack. So
wow.
as the whale slipped off the engine after it cracked it, it just basically got a little bit of a chin rash.
Yeah, sure.
And that was the other question a lot of folks said is like, I don't care about the guys. I want to know if the whale's okay. It's like, the whale's fine.
Yeah.
The whale's totally fine. And we saw it actually 2 hours later. We had, they wanted to do us an interview at the scene of the event.
Right.
Which Greg and I weren't really thrilled about, but we were kind of like, well, let's just do it. So we went out and we actually saw the whale basically doing the same thing, a couple hours later. So, the whale was definitely totally fine.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I would assume, and I've seen some descriptions of how, whales, when they are, coming up into like a school of bunker like that, they're on a mission, and they're not necessarily, they don't necessarily see everything through all the fish too. And they have sonar, but it seems to me like it was, just a freak accident. And on that topic, do we have any idea, like, what an obvious question sort of is, what about insurance in a case like this? Have you guys even found anything out on that front?
Yeah, before that, like, I just got to speak to your comment about just like how, speculation of how and why. But
yeah.
From my thoughts, obviously the kind of wrong place, wrong time is like the quick answer. But from my just thinking about like the pattern of the whale, so it was 100 feet in back of us, and we were on the other edge of the center of the bait. Basically, we're on the outer edge on the opposite side when the whale hit. So what we were thinking is what the whale did on the other side is it dove, and then when it dove, it came up. It basically ran back towards us.
Yep.
And when it shot up, I think it overshot its mark. I think it probably wanted to be like more in the center, and I think it overshot. And when it came up, it was kind of like just before the edge of that biomass when it came up. And then as it opened its mouth, when it came down, I mean, I don't know what a whale is thinking, but I'm thinking at that point when it hit the engine, I could kind of tell him, I don't know, I could feel something that the whale was like thinking the same thing as like, oh shit, or oh crap, sorry. Sorry, I don't know if you edit that out, but
You don't have to. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
For the voting magazine, so it's all good.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So I think
go ahead.
yeah, so I think that's what the whale was thinking the same thing we were. It was like, oh crap, what did I do? I definitely don't think it meant to do it, or was, trying to attack us, or we were obviously we were in the wrong place, but looking back on it, I think I'm going to be even further away from that bait, obviously.
Yeah.
So the whale can see me a little bit better, or see us a little bit better. You asked
a good lesson for anybody, that because folks are out there fishing amongst the whales, particularly this time of year, along the northeastern coast. So, you guys are fortunately a surviving cautionary tale, to an event like this. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of times I've erred on the side of caution, and that's what's crazy about it happening to me. I feel like, because, there's times I've seen boats. A lot of times I'm almost more on the outer edge than other boats, and it's been tough to kind of get my bait, because I got to really cast it out there. And a couple times buddies have been like, "We need to get closer. We need to get closer," and I'm like, "No, I don't want to get too close, because that's the biomass." So it's just, it's, I don't know. It's kind of unfortunate, because I feel like I'm more, a little bit more of like the conservative when it comes to like. fishing there than many others, but
I can dig it for sure. Well, what do you know, or do we know about insurance and whether it'll cover this?
Yeah, so insurance is definitely going to cover it, and I don't know if it's like if it's considered as an act of God or whatever it calls, but I know Greg was he's talked with me a little bit about his father-in-law, and like they put the appraiser, I think, was going to come this week and appraise the boat. And I think they agreed to, pay for the damages outside, obviously, the deductible.
Cool.
So they have to kind of look at it and see what the damages are. I don't know if the father-in-law is going to keep the boat, or just maybe total it. Like he talked about maybe even getting like a new boat. So
this episode is brought to you by Volvo Penta. With over a century of innovation under their belt, Volvo Penta understands what it means to provide people with the power that can take them as far or as deep as they want to go. With enhanced features like joystick driving and the fully integrated glass cockpit display, they help to provide you with solutions to navigate the path ahead. Trust in Volvo Penta to provide the reliability and performance you can count on. Visit volvopenta.com to learn more. So tell me real quickly too, Ryland, about, I wanted to ask, well, there's a few things. One, what were you using for bait on the stripers? We can't ignore that question. I assume you were using the pogies, but what were you fishing with?
Yeah. So, that brings up another interesting point too, is, so we're using pogies. There's no pretty way to catch pogies. If folks know how to use them for bait, you basically use a treble hook to snag them. So they kind of throw them in the bait school and rip it through the bait, and it's not pretty.
Not pretty.
But usually you catch them. And what we were doing, because Greg's a little bit different than me. He wants to pile on the bait, like just catch like 12 fish, and I'm like, well, for me it was like catch them and then put them on the hook. And then we could, because the bass are right beneath us. So we started kind of doing that more, is like, all right, we can have a few in our live well, but, let's just catch them like on demand bait, because it's just so much. It's not like we need to conserve it. We know it's going to be around for a while.
They're all out there.
So yeah, we basically we we were catching pogies, and we were using, I think I was using 30-pound braid and then connected to a swivel hook. And then there was actually a weight connected upstream of that, a slider connection that was connected to like a 3-ounce weight.
Okay.
With like a 2-foot leader or something like that, with a 8/0, 9/0 circle hook on the end, and basically hooking the pogie through the nose and then just dropping the line all the way to the bottom. Because that's, really the big striped bass are basically pushing all the bait up to the surface. So you want to try to get that pogie. So when they see the pogie drop down with that weight quickly, they're just like, oh, this is easy, easy food for us. And then they grab onto it. But at that time, when the fish ate my bait and I was on line, Greg and I actually typically fish from the bow. A lot of times we'll fish from the bow of the boat. But I actually credit a lot of me surviving for that fish, because actually the fish was running up the side of the boat. It wasn't fighting me from the back. So if I didn't move along where the fish was and have that location where I was at, like, if it pulled me up to the bow or to the right side of the boat, I might have been in a really more challenging predicament, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah,
that fish put me in a good spot, I think, to kind of like evacuate.
That's great. And I was thinking too, like if you'd been right up at the bow, like when he hit that thing, I mean, it could have really, like, it seemed like the way that the boat went up, I mean, you could have gotten launched pretty dang hard too, conceivably. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And Greg was he actually, it's hard to see Greg in it because I jump and then he's kind of blocked by the T-top, but he moved his way kind of up towards the bow when it was kind of tipping, and then he was kind of going on the right side. So when luckily when it flipped over, it didn't flip over too hard, but actually he was on the starboard side to the right, and he kind of was grabbing one of the handrails up there. And when it flipped over, he was actually underneath the boat.
Damn.
Yeah, on that side, and he just basically, his life. It was definitely good that he was wearing one, because when it inflated, he was kind of caught under the boat, but all he had to do was kind of push up on the boat and then push away.
Gotcha.
And he was free.
So he was actually a little bit underneath the boat, but was able to push himself out, like you said. Well,
exactly.
How about, a couple of other things, family reactions, and family and friend reactions, and, also just, sort of aftermath of all this, and I'm curious too, like, if there's any, sometimes after a traumatic event, I mean, people, like you said, there's all these what ifs. Are there any, is there any, you think there'll be any lasting sort of trauma with this? So family, friends, and then, kind of aftermath, what your thoughts are with a little bit of time to reflect.
Yeah. So with family, I probably called because I usually, a good thing to do too is, anytime you're going out boating, especially the ocean, I mean, actually, I should say even lakes, it doesn't matter what body of water you're doing, but is to kind of have a navigation plan and relay that back to someone. So usually what I do is, like, I always contact my mother to kind of like be like, hey, I'm going out at 6 a.m. I'll be back at 3. If you don't hear from me, give me a call.
Yeah.
So that's really important.
Yeah, we even do that. We live in Charleston and have a lot of tidal waterways. I tell my wife, if you're going out stand-up paddling, let me know, which direction you're going, because it's really important. It's really important.
Yeah, exactly. So, I was kind of telling her, I'm like, I'll probably be back around 9 or 10, and at this point, it was 8:30. And my phone, surprisingly or not, was in my pocket and it was zipped up, and it was, I mean, not fine. The speaker was a little wonky, and the charger port was wet, but other than that, it was functional. It was actually working. And so my phone is, that's what I'm talking on right now, is a phone that was in the water. So
you got to keep that no matter what, even when it becomes obsolete,
I know, exactly. So I had my phone on me. So I think if, like, a lot of people say, like, what if nobody was around? Well, I had the phone, so we probably could have called out. But the other thing I was going to mention about that is, like, if I'm off that far offshore and there's whales around and blah blah, I'm not doing without other boats around. It's just too risky. So that's kind of what I said. I was like, I don't typically. I'm not the type of person that tries to find, a spot that nobody knows way off in the middle of nowhere by myself, just because there's too many things that could go wrong. I'd rather have a fellow boater, even though he might be stealing some of my fish, there to help me if I run into a problem, right?
Absolutely. Well, did you guys have a satellite transmitter on the boat with you?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, Greg did have one, and he had like a beacon too. But I think the beacon didn't, because we were looking at it afterwards. It was on the boat, and I don't think it went off for whatever reason. I might have been like the batteries or something like that that they forgot to replace. As you were mentioning, like I contacted my mom. I was like, hey, when I got back to the dock, I was just kind of like, I'm not going to call her now because I just want to process everything. Like, and then so when we get back to Elliott. I gave her a call and I just said, hey, just let you know, this happened to me. I'm okay. You'll probably see some stuff going on. And she was like, oh, geez. I'm really surprised. The strange thing is the night before, I was actually showing pictures of all the fish and the whale to my family because I saw the whale breach, feet from other people's boats. And I was like saying, isn't this cool? Like the whales in the area, like, I'm keeping my distance, and my family was just like, I think it was my sister was like, Ryland, are you ever concerned about the whale basically knocking your boat over? And she said that the night before, and I was just like, yeah, and I was like, I think I've done a lot of research, and it's almost like getting struck by lightning. So, and then the next day it happens.
You got struck by lightning.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Jeez, man. Wow. It's
I only mentioned it to maybe like a few of my real close friends at this time, my close family. And then as the video started to come out, it's just everybody that, I knew in my past, even elementary school people are contacting me about it. Ryland, was this really you? And so it's been a whirlwind since then. So that's the family and friends thing. And then I think the second thing you were asking was about just like after effects, PTSD kind of stuff. So honestly, the first few nights, probably the first 3 nights, I wasn't sleeping well at all. I was actually waking up. I woke up the first and second night. I woke up several times to actually the whale's head, like on the engine.
Wow.
Yeah. I woke up to it and I was just like, holy crap. And just kind of like, and then processing it again and then falling back to sleep. And then there might be a little bit. So the first couple nights were really tough. Like I definitely was, basically trying to process everything. And then once those images started to clear is then when you asked about like, just the what ifs, that's when a lot of the what ifs were kind of going through my head too. What if I was wearing a life vest at the time? What if I was fishing from the bow of the boat? What if I did this differently? And then again, it's like, it's all part of like processing. And then at the end of the day, I was like, or what if I didn't go out that day? Or what if I did do this? And at this point, it's just like, I made it through this. Like I did the best I could. I think I did pretty good depending on the circumstances. A lot of people said that they, if I was in a lot of people say this, but I think they would have been different in a scenario. But a lot of people are just like, I would have ended up in the bottom of the ocean. I would have froze and not know what to do. I would have ended up in the whale's mouth, So people say that, but I think like your, survival instincts kind of take over in general. So I think, I don't know if everybody would do the same thing as me. Probably not, but I think probably quite a few would. But I think I did the best I can, considering the circumstance and how much time I had. Like the big thing I thought about too is like, what if I went right over, because we were in idle at the time. What if I went right over the throttle and just throttled up really quick and got away from the whale? But there was no time to really do that. I didn't have the time.
Yeah, looking at the video, you really, I can't imagine that you had time. It is interesting that you mentioned that you did hear the swirling, right before it came up, which I guess makes sense, but it also speaks to the mass of this creature that landed on the boat. That it was causing that much of a disturbance in the water that you kind of heard heard it right before it blew,
Yeah.
you know? Man, what an experience. And one, we're really glad you're okay as everybody else is. And two, I appreciate the lessons in this. And I also, it's interesting too, we've mentioned briefly insurance. Yeah, I guess it's probably worth it for people who have boats, who have insurance, to maybe ask about acts of God like this, so to speak. I mean, it surely can't hurt. And
Yeah.
well, and then in terms of if people want to follow you, socially, where should they tune in on your social?
Oh yeah. The other thing I was going to mention too was just about insurance. The unfortunate thing is I lost about $1,500 worth of gear.
Oh yeah, I didn't even ask about that. Right, including the
Yeah.
rod and reel setup that the fish was that your striper was hooked to. 15.
Exactly, and I love that setup too. So yeah, all that's at the bottom of the ocean. So I've been trying to figure out if any of my insurance will cover it. Right now, it's kind of a no because it wasn't on any of my assets, so it wasn't on my personal boat or not in my home at the time. So unfortunately, he'll have to be a loss, I think. But
Yeah.
it is what it is. But yeah, I'm thinking of I've been a lot of friends and family, and actually people even internationally have been asking about the story and wanting to know about a little more aftermath and etc. So, if your viewers want to follow me, I don't use social media that much, honestly, but I've been kind of putting some stuff on Instagram, and it's my tag I think is at RP Kenney, so KENNEY.
KENNEY, got it. Okay.
Yeah. So you'll find me in RP Kenney. And I might be doing. Actually, I talked to a couple people that are fellow fishermen, and we talked about doing maybe even starting a podcast about fishing stories and fishing tips and boating and stuff like that. Because I don't feel like I'm sure there's probably some out there, but I haven't got on any of them, and I know there's a lot of we have quite a bit of connections. So I think it would be kind of cool to kind of share stories and tips and stuff like that when fishing, and just, I'll tell about my story and kind of how I'm processing things and what kind of talk about what I do differently. What am I doing now? I'm actually working on my boat right now. I'm planning on going fishing probably Friday. So it would be good to kind of talk to people about how was my first day back on the water,
Yeah, for sure.
Stuff that.
Well, Ryland Kenney, I really appreciate you taking the time for our Power Motor Yacht pod this week, and you guys stay safe. And we want to thank everybody for listening to the Power Motor Yacht podcast. This is Chris Dixon, senior editor with Power Motor Yacht, and I've been speaking with Ryland Kenney. And thanks again, bud.
Yeah, it was a good interview. Appreciate it.
Likewise.
Stay safe out there, everybody.
This episode was brought to you by Volvo Penta. Whether you're cruising down calm waters or challenging heavy seas, trust Volvo Penta to provide safe, innovative, reliable marine solutions made to move you wherever your journey takes you. Visit volvopenta.com and explore their innovative marine and industrial products and services.